That said, our primary purpose is to entertain, and where we can entertain responsibly, obviously, we try to do that. We try to have a positive impact on the world. But the first thing we need to do is entertain.
There was an in-depth piece, like a behind-the-scenes piece, talking about how they've been in a full meltdown about this girl for a couple of years now.
AMC's announcement that it would remove the live-action Snow White adaptation from all of its theaters came as a shock to the industry. Disney had once expected a triumphant run buoyed by the iconic status of the original story and the star power attached to the new project, but in a move that stunned analysts and fans alike, AMC reported that it saw no further reason to keep the film on its screen. Sales had plummeted so drastically that continuing to show the film amounted to lost revenue. Empty.
I have a clip of it.
Oh, okay, great.
Her being a retard.
Okay.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That laugh.
That is
not going to be saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can.
Seats in theaters that could have been sold for more profitable titles. The downturn had been weeks in the making, but no one imagined it would end like this. Even Disney, with its vast resources and legendary marketing machine, couldn't salvage this adaptation from the controversies that had dogged it at every turn. The meltdown on live television, the behind-the-scenes rumors, the upheaval among cast members, each contributed to a fan backlash that grew louder and more relentless with every passing day. Disney's promotional campaign had promised a fresh take on a legendary story featuring an incoming star Kel Zegler and an established Celity.
It just takes a beloved movie and makes it much more boring and much less realistic. The movie is really, really bad.
Gal Gadot. Yet almost everything that could go wrong did go wrong, culminating in AMC's unprecedented decision to cut the film's theatrical run short well before it could gain analyst traction. Industry commentators scrambled to understand the root cause of this debacle. Some argued that fans had grown weary of Disney's frequent attempts to modernize its classic catalog. Others believed that the meltdown surrounding Rachel Zegler and her strong public statements, combined with a corporate PR strategy that felt strained and inauthentic.
Our rights are on the line, folks.
Bitch! The right to buy Cosby sweaters?
Come on.
That's the face of a serial killer.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
Sparked the catastrophic drop in attendance. Whatever the reasons, the result was the same: the film's dismal box office performance, amplified by a wave of negative ability, made it impossible for AMC to justify keeping it on its screens. The story of how once promising movie reached this low point became, in its own right, a tale of caution for studios everywhere. Joe Rogan, in an extensive monologue on his popular podcast, dissected the fiasco in painstaking detail. He highlighted that when AMC announced the removal of the film, it was more than just a signal of poor numbers. It was a cultural moment. Audiences now had visible proof that Disney's customary Vanda's brand.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
So we didn't do that this time.
Loyalty, marketing prowess, star-studded casts were not always enough to guarantee success. The meltdown had overshadowed everything else about the movie. Rogan traced the chain of events that led to the meltdown, including Rachel Zegler's candid interviews, her unexpected remarks on The View, and her social media posts that diverged substantially from Disney's preferred messaging. The meltdown took place in front of a live studio audience, turning a contained piece of press promotion into a headline-grabbing spectacle. According to Rogan, the meltdown would have been damaging under any circumstances, but in combination with changes to the beloved story itself.
The primary suffering is being sent in by my company to watch a children's movie as a single man, like 2 p.m. on a Thursday. That was the first part that was a little bit weird, but I was basically the only person in the theater.
It created a perfect storm of negative backlash. The fiasco began innocently enough. Rachel Zegler was originally seen as an inspired choice for the new lead. She had shown vocal talent, displayed a modern sensibility that might speak to younger audiences and carried the promise of bridging the gap between old and new, but as details about the adaptation leaked, fans discovered that major story elements, key themes, and character arcs had been heavily altered or removed altogether. The shift.
I don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely when it got announced.
He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
Thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry.
From a faithful retelling to a reimagined narrative, triggered a wave of skepticism. People wondered if Disney's attempt to update the story had gone too far, sacrificing the emotional heart of the original. And in the midst of this tension, Rachel Ziegler's public persona added fuel to the fire. She sometimes spoke dismissively about the classic elements of the story, or at least that was how many fans interpreted her remarks. They felt that her tone suggested the old version was outdated.
And so it was like
those people.
Very much this, yes. It was this
people that we
awakening
need to educate, the people that we need to love into awareness.
love them in the right direction.
An artifact of a bygone era that deserved little reverence. Furious comments began flooding social media, rather than seeing Ziegler as a fresh face revitalizing a timeless tale. Frustrated fans began labeling her as the symbol of everything gone wrong with the adaptation. Disney, to its credit, attempted to manage the fallout by organizing a series of talk show appearances. The hope was to restore the film's reputation before it hit theaters, ensuring that the negativity would not overshadow opening weekend. However, Rachel Ziegler's independence clashed with Disney's top-down efforts to rein her in on social.
Very few people wanted to see this. Even the little kids who like Disney movies, even they don't seem to be turning up in droves for the movie because the movie is really, really bad.
Media, she posted her own viewpoints at times, proudly stating she would not compromise her values for a corporate narrative. This stance might have drawn admiration in a different context, but given the sensitivity of the project and the audience's protectiveness over the original story, it intensified the controversy. Critics argued that her statements often sounded condescending toward those who loved the older film. Defenders claimed she was merely advocating for a modern perspective, championing representation and inclusivity. Regardless, the clash between an outspoken star and a multinational corporation.
And so I've got some bona fides here on being fair. The movie was absolutely terrible.
Quickly became the defining storyline, eclipsing discussions of the film's artistic elements. As the chatter around potential box office pitfalls grew, industry insiders speculated that Disney executives were growing increasingly anxious. Bob Iger, who had recently returned to a top leadership role, had a reputation for deftly navigating corporate tech introvers, yet with each passing day, it seemed that the studio's crisis management approach lacked coherence instead of a unified message.
In every way that the movie differed from the beloved 1937 original, it was worse.
Fans witnessed contradictory statements from cast members, rumors about behind-the-scenes turmoil, and a sense that no one fully understood the scope of the problem. The meltdown on The View was the most glaring manifestation of this disarray. The show had been handpicked by Disney's PR department as a comfortable platform, a daytime environment known for its ability to engage viewers in mainstream conversations. The hope was that Rachel Ziegler could share her experiences, address fan concerns, and demonstrate that while the adaptation was modern, it still honored the original spirit behind.
Basically, this movie was like you took the original Snow White and just put everything through this filter of liberalism. It wasn't through a filter of Japanese anime, it was through a filter of liberalism.
The scenes, however, tensions brewed. Production staff from The View reportedly received direct instructions from Disney about preferred talking points, areas Ziegler should emphasize, and angles she ought to avoid. But as soon as the segment began, it became evident that Rachel Ziegler had her own agenda. She wanted to speak on political matters unrelated to the film, and she showed little interest in reciting the sanitized lines the studio had prepared. The show's producers, feeling the pressure from Disney, attempted to steer her back on track, but the friction was visible during the live broadcast. She made statements that critics would later call incendiary, suggesting the original story's core themes were outdated and that audiences
So from the casting to the class politics, the sexual politics, the regime politics, everything about it was liberal.
Who clung too tightly to nostalgia needed to embrace change. Fans who were already on the fence about the adaptation heard these comments as a direct insult, fueling a wave of anger that exploded across social media. Moments later, the real meltdown occurred. According to eyewitness accounts, there were frantic gestures off camera as producers tried to cut Ziegler off or pivot the conversation. She refused to be guided. Doubling down on her remarks, the segment spiraled out of control so rapidly that The View's host Whoopi Goldberg joy.
Snow White is generally understood to be a very, very white person. And in this case, they decided, nope, no, that doesn't make any sense. So I don't think we're allowed to say that, right? I was referring to the movie as sand beige.
Bihar and Sunny Holland were left scrambling to fill airtime. Security or staff from the show escorted Ziegler from the set, and the camera cut to an abrupt commercial break. The meltdown never fully aired, but partial clips and secondhand reporting instantly circulated online, fueling a media firestorm. Memes, jokes, and a torrent of outrage flooded the internet, ensuring that every subsequent discussion about the film would lead back to that chaotic live appearance. In his podcast commentary, Joe Rogan described the meltdown as a PR nightmare. Not only had Disney lost control of the narrative, but it did so in the most public way possible on a live broadcast with a massive audience. Damage control measures were initiated immediately, but the meltdown had taken on a life of its own, becoming a rallying point for those who believed the new Snow White was an affront to the original. Critics of Rachel Ziegler saw her meltdown as proof that she was too headstrong for a project that required at least some measure of deference.
It's no really knock on her. If you did the autobiography of Malcolm X, would you cast Tom Hanks? If you remade Moana, would you cast a little Irish guy? No, you wouldn't. So that was off the top.
To corporate strategy. Meanwhile, her supporters claimed she had every right to speak her mind. The fiasco drew commentary from all corners of the media landscape, overshadowing the film's other cast members, including Gallardo. Gallardo had been cast in a high-profile role. Many believed her presence might offer a balancing effect, bringing star wattage and an air of established credibility. But as soon as the meltdown narrative took over, Gadot became an afterthought. Rogan pointed out that according to rumors, there might have been friction between the two actors. Allegations circulated that Rachel Ziegler had privately criticized Gadot's background, or AMC, which had dedicated screens in hopes of a blockbuster, found themselves playing the film to half-empty auditoriums. Parents steered their children toward other releases, either because they felt the new adaptation was too controversial or because they had been turned off by the unending wave of bad press. As the sales drop became undeniable, AMC found itself at a crossroads. Typically, a large Disney release secures a guaranteed window in theaters, benefiting both the studio and the exhibitors. But as the negative headlines piled on, AMC realized it was losing money. Ticket sales were so low that it made more financial sense to reallocate screens to more reliable performers. The film had become toxic, overshadowed by scandal. Even the promise of a big-budget spectacle was not enough to draw audiences fatigued by controversy. So, in a move that industry veterans called unprecedented,
it is not racist to suggest that a character who is described in the original as skin white as snow, that is literally how the character is described in the original, that's a character description in the same way that, as you mentioned, in Moana.
For a major Disney title, AMC removed the film from its theaters entirely. The timing of this decision varied by region, but within a short span, AMC's official channels confirmed that they were pulling the plug. When asked for comment, AMC executives stated that the film's performance did not justify the continued allocation of screens internally. There were rumblings about the pushback from local theater managers who reported day after day of low turnout. Many said customers would walk past the Snow White poster without a second glance, or they would openly discuss how the film looked unappealing. After the meltdown coverage, the entire fiasco spilled into the mainstream consciousness in a way that left AMC no option but to withdraw. Some critics hypothesized that AMC's relationship with Disney might be strained by this event, though others countered that Disney itself might have discreetly agreed with the decision. After all, if the film wasn't making money, continuing to show it only deepened the humiliation. It was better to quietly move on and let the next big release Take center stage. Joe Rogan took special note of this moment, calling it a watershed in his view. It wasn't simply about AMC's scheduling preferences, it was a signal that an entire system where Disney and major exhibitors work symbiotically could crumble when a film becomes too controversial, even big budget. Prestige pictures are vulnerable to being yanked if they fail to meet audience expectations. Rogan reiterated how the meltdown on The View was the turning point. Before that, there had been hope among some insiders that the adaptation might still draw curiosity seekers or families who were not deeply engaged in the controversy, but once the meltdown footage and its associated rumor circulated, any ambivalence turned to outright disinterest or even hostility. The meltdown had ripped away any veil of normalcy and revealed a production teetering on the brink of chaos. This meltdown also turned into a cautionary tale about how studios handle live interviews. Usually, a tightly orchestrated publicity tour attempts to keep the messaging consistent and the star locked into a talking points narrative, but the live, unscripted environment of The View exposed how vulnerable these tours can be. Once Rachel Zegler decided to voice her own opinions, the producers had minimal power to stop her. They tried, but the meltdown that followed was unstoppable and reverberated across every corner of the entertainment world. Disney's attempt to clamp down only made the situation look worse, reinforcing the impression that the studio was engaging in damage control at the expense of open dialogue. Fans who had been casually following the story suddenly becoming good, if only to watch the spectacle unfold in real time. Meanwhile, Bob Iger's leadership came under scrutiny by returning to Disney at a tumultuous moment. Iger had inherited a lineup of remakes in various stages of production. Many had done well in the past. The studio had grown confident that simply attaching the Disney name and a recognizable title would bring families to theaters, but the fiasco with Snow White revealed the limits of that strategy. When negative buzz spirals out of control, it doesn't matter how storied or beloved the source material is, audiences can and will reject it. Detractors pounced on the meltdown as proof that Disney had grown complacent. The meltdown is more than just an awkward blip on daytime TV, it's the moment that ensures this adaptation of Snow White will be remembered not for its creative vision or updated themes, but for the meltdown that destroyed its credibility and sent the largest theater chain in the country running for the exit. And it's the moment that will shape how studios approach their stars, their messaging, and their beloved properties from now on, lest the meltdown repeat itself in another equally disastrous form.